Welcome back everyone to round 8 of the Croatian Team Championship, and today I'm playing against Alexander Motylev, originally from Russia, but now he's representing Romania. And another former European champion actually, which I just realized today. He was European champion already some time ago, I think like 15-20 years, if I'm not totally wrong. He was also Russian champion a couple of years ago, so a very experienced player. His current rating is around 2600, but his peak was also above 2700. I think it was 2720 quite a few years ago. But he's of course still very strong, probably not as strong as he was a couple of years ago when he was above 2700, but still extremely experienced, and he has a very good understanding overall. So yeah, I'll try to play it safe as usual. Of course, people are already gonna laugh at me for saying this because of my 7 out of 7 draws in the tournament, but I'm gonna stick to my style nevertheless, even though the streak might continue. And yeah, let's see how it goes. I was actually thinking quite a lot on what to play, on what to start with. I was either thinking of starting with d4 or with knight f3 on the first move. I didn't really feel like going e4 today, since he plays many different things, also the knight orf, which I don't feel like playing today. And now I decided for knight f3 on the first move, because if I would start with d4, then he often plays the Slav, and he just is extremely experienced there, and I could probably force a draw there, but that's not what I want to do in this game. I at least want to be able to try something. And yeah, if I start with knight f3, then he has some other systems at his disposal, which I still have to check now, but he has some issues in reaching the Slav, I think. So therefore this was my conclusion on why I want to start with knight f3. So yeah, let's see how it goes. I will repeat some more lines now, and I'll see you after the game. Welcome back everyone to today's recap, and the streak continues. It's been 8 games and 8 draws, and it's really getting a bit frustrating, since today I was also I had a more or less winning position, but yeah, let's have a look and see what happened. So I played against Alexander Motylev, who is of course extremely strong. His peak rating was above 2700 too, like Krivoruchko and Šarić too, and he's been European champion a couple of years ago, as I've mentioned already in the video in the morning, and also Russian champion, so he's super experienced. When I prepared against him, I even saw some games like Kasparov against Motylev, which ended in a draw, so that was yeah, already kind of an indication that it's not gonna be such an easy game today. But yeah, okay, let's jump right in. I went knight f3, he went d5, g3, and here he surprised me a little bit by going b6, which is a sideline which has been played pretty often nowadays. There was even a game in this tournament from one of my teammates. It was Tica Sven against Martinovic, I think. And the computer at first gives actually quite a big advantage for white, but then it's actually not so easy, since black has quite an easy plan to follow. So black's idea is that always when c4 comes, he just wants to take, and then to develop with e6, knight f6, bishop e7, and then short castle. And if he manages to consolidate, and if white is not precise enough, then black is totally fine. I was lucky that I analyzed this quite well for my chess-based course, and knight a3 is the very accurate move order. The point is, he went knight d7 here, knight takes c4, e6, but let's say black makes some logical moves, e6, knight takes c4, now knight f6. This is actually a big mistake, because now I have knight e5. And if he goes bishop e7, now I have the strict knight takes f7, and if the king takes back, I have knight e5 check, and I'm picking up the bishop on b7 when white is just winning. If I would start with castle, or let's say with this move order, castle e6, and okay, let's say knight f6, c4, d takes c4, knight a3, e6. Now knight takes c4, bishop e7, knight e5 doesn't do anything, because black can just castle, and now knight takes f7 doesn't work, because black can simply capture with the rook, and there is no discovery with check. So this is kind of the important move order thing here for white. Fortunately I knew this, so I took he took knight a3 now. I did also remember there's this move e5, which is not that great. I think that queen e4 check was the easiest way, and then to pick up the pawn on c4. I think black had to go for this endgame when white has just a pleasant position. So he played knight d7, knight takes e4, and now e6. So he understood this trick with knight d5, of course, so therefore he prevented it. By starting with knight d7, I castled, now bishop e7. I guess knight f6 is also the same, even though I remember I had one game here as well, and I think I do have the same trick here. Now if bishop e7, knight f7 works again, and if takes, bishop g2, I think here was queen a4 check, which is pretty strong, and after c6, now king g2, queen d5 check, I think f3, when black had to go for this endgame here where white is just better because black has these doubled pawns. I think this was my analysis, but don't take it for granted. And the important detail was that b5 fails to queen b5, c6, and now queen b7, the last important move, when both the bishop on g2 are hanging and there is this mate threat on f7. So pretty instructive lines here, I think. He started with bishop e7 and now this move queen a4. I still had this in my preparation, but I spent a couple of minutes just to make sure. And the point is, after knight f6, now I go knight e5. There was one more interesting detail. I think that a6 threatening b5 runs into knight e5, and now if b5, queen f4. I think this was one more detail. If he takes now, he's losing because the bishop on b7 is hanging and there is this mating threat on f7. And if he goes knight f6, I think I have this same trick again with takes and knight g5, and white is just winning here, I believe. So he went knight f6 and now knight e5, short castle, knight c6, and here he has to go for this position where I get the bishop here, and yeah, my preparation more or less ended here after b3, when I had in my notes that black is probably okay, but white does have the slightly more pleasant position because of the bishop pair. There was also... Pardon me. There was also a way for white not to take, and I think it was something like b4 possibly, or b3 or d3. But then, okay, let's just put this on the board. I thought to remember that black just goes bishop d6 and can exchange this knight sooner or later. Also, this knight is a bit loose. For example, if bishop e2, I guess knight c5 could also be an idea. When I have to take, and now bishop c6, black is probably winning a pawn here. So therefore I took on e7, b3, c5, bishop b2, and here he played rook fe8, which I think is already a slight inaccuracy, because he wants to push e5, but simply now I go d4 when the rook is pretty misplaced on e8. I still somewhat remember that rook d8 was the move, and I think that I would have gone just rook d1, rook c1, and then d4. Again, position is probably okay for black, but he does need to be a bit careful. What I briefly discussed with my opponent was that e5 probably fails due to knight takes e5, but we were both not that sure. After knight e5, there is bishop e7 when I simply won a pawn. And if he takes on g2 first, then we thought that knight takes d7 is simply working. But yeah, it's probably not that easy. If bishop f1, I need to think also here what to take, how to take, but I guess knight f6 works, takes, and now maybe check and queen h4. This looks pretty nice. And it looks like to me white is winning because bishop f6 is threatened. And if king g7, I have queen g5 check, king h8, and now bishop f6. This nice pin here, black cannot take because of the pin. So that's why he played rook e8 to prepare e5, but I guess he somewhat underestimated that I just pushed d4, c takes d4, and now queen takes d4, and here I was again a bit surprised that he went e5, because it does kind of bring my bishop even more into the game. Now the pawn on e5 is somewhat of a target. And yeah, I thought that still he should probably go for something like rook d8 or rook c8 and simply admit his mistake when he's probably, again, a little bit worse, but I thought it shouldn't be that bad. After e5, I went queen h4, which seemed logical to me. The computer, I guess, argues that the queen is placed on another square better. But this seemed logical. He went bishop a6, probably another inaccuracy, but it's also not so clear what else to do. If he goes rook c8, maybe the computer wants to do something like this. I would have just played rook c1. Again, to me it looks like white is just a bit better here. So he went bishop a6, now I just protected the pawn on e2, and here he went rook ac8, which is really, now it's really starting to go into the wrong direction for him, because I think he missed this move queen a4, when all of a sudden all of his pieces are a bit uncoordinated, and he cannot move the bishop now because I would simply take the pawn on a7. So he went knight c5, and now the next important move, queen a3. Now his problem is that the pawn on e5 is hanging and I'm threatening b4 at the same time. If I get b4, then he will just lose a piece because he would have to move the knight and then I can take on a6. So he played e4, which seemed to me also like the only move. And here I made a slight inaccuracy by going knight d4. I also told my opponent after the game that knight h4 would have probably been stronger. And now the thing is, for him in the game, he went knight d4, queen d7, which then he somewhat was able to survive. But after knight h4, he doesn't have the same, because after queen d7, my bishop is still controlling the diagonal, and I can simply take here, and his king is super weak, and computer already gave something like +2 or +3 here, which also makes a lot of sense, because the king is weak, the pawn structure is broken, the knight can often jump into f5. So yeah, the computer gives e3 as the best, but in general, once black has to push e3, this pawn will probably be more of a weakness than a strength, because also knight f5 will come, and yeah, this was the engine line, bishop h3 for some reason, bishop d7, and again, a position like this, and pawn on e3 will be a big target for a very long time. So this would have caused a lot more problems. Computer gives something like +2 here after knight h4. But I went knight d4 rather quickly, because it just seemed so logical as well to put the knight here, since often I'm also controlling the c2 square where the rook cannot enter. So it looked very logical to me, but yeah, knight h4 is a lot stronger. Now he went queen d7, which I somewhat missed. His idea is that now if I go b4, he always has knight a4. And yeah, then his knight is already pretty active. So I went rook ac1, again, which seemed pretty logical, because my issue was if I go rook d1, threatening some knight jumps possibly, then I always thought he goes rook d8 with either this or with the other rook, and then I can never really move this knight, because he will always take on d1. So I went rook c1, now bishop b7, and here I went bishop a1, which I think was still pretty good. The idea was nice, since now after a5 I simply wanted to bring the queen on this nice diagonal, and now we have the full battery when the knight has big trouble moving, because there are always these mating threats on g7. By the way, just to mention, I think that I cannot take the pawn on a7, since I just didn't see anything after knight d5. I just thought my queen is getting trapped. Rook a8 is coming on the next move. So I went bishop a1. Now I think that queen a7 is already a threat. Let's say black goes something like h6, because now after queen a7, now knight d5, I would have queen a3 when the queen is able to get back to b2. So now he went a5, now queen b2, rook cd8, and now knight c2, which I think is still a decent plan, because I wanted to bring my knight to e3. And also I'm opening up the diagonal, so now the knight can actually never move anymore. And if the knight comes to e3, actually, then I think it's very dangerous. Let's say, again, black does nothing, h6, knight e3, and okay, let's say he waits again. I often have the idea, first of all, rook d1 is coming now, and I also have this idea to get h3 and then knight g4 often, when yeah, the troubles on the diagonal are even getting worse for him. So I went queen d2, which I think was the best defensive move. Here I went knight e3. I was also thinking about a move like queen b1, because I wasn't sure if I want to actually exchange queens. But here there were all sorts of ideas with knight g4, for example, already possible threats with knight takes f2, queen h6 could be coming as well. So I didn't want to go there. I was also thinking about rook d1, but again, this position I had a really hard time evaluating. And the computer already gives around equal here. And yeah, this just seemed unnecessarily risky. The rook on d1, I thought it will be kicked out with knight e3, but first of all, that was not entirely clear if I actually can kick it out. And yeah, it just seemed unnecessary to go for this. So I went knight e3, going for the endgame, and here I still thought I have pretty good chances, but here I played bishop c3 a bit too quickly. I realized that if I can exchange those two knights and then get the bishop to e3, I have pretty good chances to play for an edge, but I just couldn't work it out how to do it during the game. It seems like rook c2 is a very smart move, which also looks very logical, because I simply have to avoid rook d2. He went bishop a6 to now threaten rook d2, since if you would go rook d2 right away, I still have knight c4 when the rook has to go back, and then the pawn on b6 is hanging. So therefore he went bishop a6, and rook d2, rook c2, I missed that after Knight d5. Now I can take, and now bishop c1, which I think is a very nice and instructive plan. And once I get the bishop to e3, the bishop controls the d4 square, and the knight can never move because the pawn on b6 will also be a target. So this would have been still quite some suffering for my opponent. But I played bishop c3 too quickly, and after knight d5 I realized that there's actually nothing for me. I wanted to go for bishop a5, which I also did in the game, but after a couple of desperados, knight takes b3, a takes b3, b takes a5, rook c5 now. I will win the pawn on a5, but the issue is that my bishop on g2 will always be completely blocked out of the game, so I have no winning chances here whatsoever. I did also think about some other things like knight takes d5, but here again my issue was that the bishop on c3 is now not doing that much at all, and the bishop would much rather be on e3 than on c3. So therefore this idea with rook c2 was, I think, pretty nice. And after knight d5 takes bishop c1, and I guess if you go something like rook d8, just bishop e3, and rook d1, maybe I can go king f1, that's possible. That looks decent, and I'm already threatening to take on c5. So yeah, this would have been a pretty nice chance. Computer gives 0.60. Let's say what he comes up with here. Yeah, rook e8 is the best move. Yeah, and he just goes back or does something like h6 here. So yeah, this is not so easy. Okay, also not easy for me to make any progress. Since if I go for something like this will probably always be a draw, because black will probably have enough counterplay here. But I guess I can slowly improve my position. Maybe king f1 first. And if g5 now, I'm asking what happens after bishop c5. That's rook d2. This is just a draw c4. I thought that I could get out here with f3, king f2, king e3, but he has c4, yeah, and again, he will take on a2 when it's just a draw. So I really have to do some slow maneuvering here as well. Also not easy. Maybe I will open up the position with f3 at some point. So yeah, this is also not not that easy for me. So yeah, after these desperados here, I thought I still have some small chances because I am a pawn up, but he played very accurately, and he simply boxed in my bishop here, g6. I played b4, and now h5 also accurate, and here he got the full box when my bishop is just never getting out anymore. And yeah, rook e6, I still tried rook d8, but after rook b6, h3, now he cannot take on b4, because I would win the bishop on c8. But he simply went bishop e6, and after taking I offered a draw, since there are just no chances for both of us. He even thought quickly if he wants to play on, but I think it's yeah. Even if I give up the pawn on b4, it should be a draw, because white has only one weakness, which is the bishop on g2, and there are no more pieces on the queen side. If there were more pawns on the queen side, I would be in serious danger here. But even if I give up the pawn on b4, black will never have any serious chances. I did also think about going something like g4 here, but it seemed quite risky. Even he can go h4, which the computer gives, when after gf5, the bishop on g2 isn't a better piece anyway, so this doesn't help much in general. And also I would have to think about things like this, where all of a sudden probably anything can happen. Even though the computer gives some slight edge for white here, 0.1, but now already there's somewhat of an imbalance. So I think, again, a pretty decently played game from myself, but I'm a bit upset about this chance with knight h4, since this would have been yeah, pretty big, 1.8 for white knight h4, and it's actually very tough for black to hold this. So yeah, 8 games, 8 draws. Tomorrow I'm playing against Chigaev with the black pieces, so let's see what will happen there. Overall, I'm pretty satisfied with my play. To be honest, I was never in any real danger against such a strong opposition. The only thing I really need to work on is my technique. Just being able to score the full point out of very good positions. I had against Kovaruchko in round 3 a totally winning position. Against Moroni, I offered this draw in a winning position, and yeah, today was the next one where I just gave away the chances. But yeah, I hope that you enjoyed today's recap as well. If you did, don't forget to leave a like and subscribe. Otherwise, thank you for watching, and I will see you tomorrow.